Jasper, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Having enjoyed several wonderful conversations with you in the past, I'm really intrigued to see where this goes today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Yeah, we've had lots of great conversations. Always feel the better for them. Like a good sea swim, never regret them.
Thank you very much. So, Jasper, as you're aware, we jump straight in with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Yeah, this is. I gave this literally 2 minutes thought this morning. I've often thought about the question when I've been listening to your podcast with other guests, and I suppose the temptation is with the ego to come up with something really profound, something that might last in the memory for listeners. But if I'm being completely honest with myself, I think it changes and evolves all the time for me. I'm not pursuing one quest or question. So yeah, I think, like, going back to, so just as a bit of context, I qualified as a coach in 2013, 2014. And I think back then I really drank from the fire hose with the high performance Kool-Aid, kind of, everything that came with it. For a good reason, I don't, I can kind of have a bit of a laugh at myself in the same way maybe that an author will always laugh at the first thing that they've written. But I mean, it's kind of a self-learning stage that I think I just needed to go through. So back then the question would have been very different. It would have been, how do I optimize performance? Something around that kind of sphere. And it's evolved a good bit over time. But I think at the last year, myself and another one of your former guests, Paul Gleason, ran a retreat in this time last year. In fact, it's a year and 2 days to the date. And we did it in the Eco Resort in Deerstone, which is just down near Glendalough in County Wicklow. And I came away from there with a question for 2025, and it was, how can I live in wonder? And I suppose the basis of the question was, I had gone through a bit of a process over the previous 2 years up to that point, or 18 months of the previous 2 years, maybe a better way of putting it. But I kind of had to learn myself that I can't always expect to be on it. I can't always expect to be performing. I consciously would have articulated that. I would have known that, but subconsciously I wasn't allowing myself that. I wasn't permitting myself that, which is a weird kind of juxtaposition and dissonance to have experienced, because literally I would have articulated, I would have shared that with anyone. I know it's okay to be flawed. I know it's okay to feel crap, but somewhere inside me that wasn't okay, even though I said it was and knew it was. Cognitively, I didn't somewhere else. I find it hard to explain that, but that's just the way it was. So I kind of came around through that process of kind of a lot of personal reflection, a lot of sharing with people who are, some people qualified to listen, others good enough to listen, like yourself. I just went, well, shit's going to happen. So whatever happens, happens. And I can either react to it, resist it, have a different expectation, and struggle unnecessarily, or I can, maybe embrace is too strong, but I can hold it and address it and accept it.
What a delightfully human dissonance, of what we know and then of what we're still feeling or resisting. Just out of interest for you, what was that? What did you sense was most in resistance to allowing that to be the case, that you don't always have to be on it?
what was most in resistance to, so what was the subconscious pattern that was kind of anchoring me to something else?
Yeah, yeah.
I think it was kind of a programming from a number of years, like I said, of just being high performing, of needing to present almost like an image uh, of knowing what high performance was and looked like physically, psychologically, professionally, even in a family environment. Like I worked with a parenting coach because I was snapping at the kids through COVID, and I kind of felt bad and guilty about that, and I wanted to kind of address that. So then I felt like, oh yeah, look, I kind of know quite a bit about this rupture and repair, all this kind of stuff. I think you spoke with the coach that I worked with, Yvonne. So like, I suppose I was always exploring different angles, worldviews, teachings. Like I went to a Chinese medicine practitioner when I had no. She was like, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "Well, just I'm curious." And she was like, "No, you come here when there's an ailment that's typically Western medicine deals with acute illness really well." Like she was qualified in both, staying at Greystones in County Wicklow, and she's like, she's qualified in both. She goes, Western medicine, if you have a heart attack or you break a limb, off you go. Ongoing, long-term ailments or syndromes. There's a better word for it that's escaping me at the moment. Conditions can be treated really well with Eastern approaches or non-Western, more holistic approaches, alternatives, whatever you want to call them. And I was like, great. So, like, let's look at that. And she was like, yeah, but do you want IVF treatment or what's going on? I was like, no. So anyway, she kind of read, I don't know if you've ever been to one before, but she asked me to sit down. She called, date of birth, a few basic things, like details from me. And then she just looked at me and she sketched out my 5 elements. And I was like, this is deadly. Like, this is cool. And she nailed a lot of stuff spot on. So I suppose I've always had that curiosity, and it was always not just with a view to high performance, but sometimes just with a view to self-knowing, self-learning. But when it was kind of built upon and conditioned year after year, I suppose, I don't know, but I think maybe to go back to the question that you asked, maybe that was just a really strong chain to you can think or find your way past feeling rubbish or going through a kind of a dip. And I don't mean mental health dip, because I've been fortunate enough never to experience that, but just a sense of bleh. Just didn't have my normal mojo or energy about me. So yeah, I don't know. Look, like I said, I've read a lot about lots of different approaches. I did a psychedelic experience before, and through that, it was more like a death and a rebirth. That's the kind of the insight I got to myself, the inevitability of death and rebirth in whatever shape or form that takes. And that's what I kind of felt like. I felt like my inner identity was going through a bit of a reboot. And I think it's Annie Duke, who was a World Poker Series champion and an author. She wrote a book called Grit, I believe, or Quit, maybe. Might have that wrong. But she said something along the lines of, when your identity is wrapped up in your activity, the things you do, it's very hard to change behavior without abandoning who you are. And I think my identity was too much wrapped up in being of support, having answers, finding a better way when I kind of just needed to sit and wallow, or as someone told me once, the Americans call it embrace the suck. And yeah, I just needed to kind of go through rather than trying to catch the death cycle at the start of the downward curve and go to another plateau. I just needed to actually go, no, fuck, let's just go right down with this one. So I did. I didn't rush it.
And for you, Jasper, what was that like to, like, was there a point where you realized you were letting go of that identity? Like, in terms of, did it evolve over time subtly, or were there specific moments?
Yeah. So there were a couple of kind of moments that stand out in memory, but I guess that's just the way the human memory works. It was definitely a slow evolution. Um, so we had taken an extended family break over the summer of 2023, and we kind of took the car on a ferry down to Bilbao and spent 4 weeks around northern Spain and southern France and the Pyrenees and over to Costa Brava, and it was amazing back through the Rioja region. We had a great time. We hooked up with different friends along the way, and then we came back and I had a week of intense work, and then we took 3 weeks in the west of Ireland as well. So it was great. And then when I was away, actually in France, I was kind of just having a nice morning coffee to myself and making some notes and journaling, I suppose. But it wasn't. I don't have a specific style of journaling. I was just writing my thoughts out, and I've been listening to some different podcasts, and I was kind of like, what's going to help? Like, business was in a great place post COVID. Things had been kind of really strong, built out a good client base. Like, corporate clients were, it wasn't just too concentrated in one area. Actually, maybe it was, but it was certainly less concentrated than it had been. And yeah, there were like some great people working with me in my company, like as other coaches and other practitioners as well. And I felt really delighted and blessed to have those relationships. So things were in a great place, and here we were having an amazing summer. And I was like, what's kind of going to help me connect with myself in a deeper way, more resonant way? What's next, basically? And I think I'd been listening to, is it Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, and a few others like that in different podcasts over a short space of time, and they had all mentioned therapeutic conversation, psychotherapy, and not from a not all from a place of kind of uncovering trauma or that side of therapy, more a case of, not exclusively, but a lot of the time, a case of just felt like it would be useful and helpful. And I was like, well, why wouldn't I do that then? And there was a part of me kind of going, because there's nothing wrong with you, so to speak, the old ego kicking in again. So anyway, I spoke to a mate of mine and asked her, she's a psychotherapist, and she put me in touch with someone, and just didn't really feel the connection with that person. So kind of kissed a couple of frogs and landed with a great guy called Brian. And then in the meantime, before the first session was scheduled, a number of my corporate clients who had wanted programs to go ahead in September, October, November, when we had lined them up before I went away, which gave me great sense of security and comfort going away. They just said that basically the tech crunch from the mega tech firms had come through, filtered through to the profitability of the big four and the law firms, which I worked with all three. So now my three main industries or sectors where there's client-facing, fee-earning leaders working there, we're all feeling the squeeze. And they just press pause on these programs. They didn't press stop and cancel. They pressed pause. And I went in to see Brian the first time, and I remember him asking me when the first, so who are you? And I said, well, whoa.
Let's start with the easy one.
Yeah. And I said, well, I mean, I can answer that in terms of like labels that society would attach to me, or I can go really deep and spiritual and say, like, I am consciousness or something. Like, where do we start? And he was like, what comes up for you? And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go with the former because it just feels a bit too deep end for me to go in with my philosophical and spiritual and universal answer. And even maybe that was quite telling, that I was kind of protecting or a bit of a shit. Anyway, so I said I was a high performance coach and a father and a husband, etc. Right. So it kind of went down that angle. And I then said, look, I went about setting these conversations up because I was feeling amazing and great. And I'm going to be honest, these things have happened now in the last couple of weeks, and it seems to be having, I think the phrase I used was, an oversized impact on me, considering they're just pause buttons, but it's really weighing on me, and I'm concerned, and I'm feeling a bit, I suppose, anxious about it and worried. I'm ruminating on it. I'm thinking about the problem, and I don't normally think like that. And he was like, right, okay. So, and he's kind of got a funny style, Brian. It's almost like he's in a funny way. There's kind of like, he repeats things you say, and it's almost like you're having a bit of a laugh. There's a bit of a mocking tone to it. And I don't think there is, but he's like, right. So a high performance coach is feeling a bit anxious. Wow. Okay. And I was like, well, where does this kind of go? Anyway, so we took a few sessions. It was a weekly thing. And I'd be kind of saying to him each week, I know this is okay. I'm going through a bit of a dip, and, here are the things that worry me and concern me. They're, my financial obligations to the family, and we've just done a renovation in our house the previous year, which is why we took an extended break the following summer, because we hadn't been away all through COVID. And I was kind of like, we kind of want to nail these things down. And it was about kind of taking action. But I said to him, I don't have any expectations of any particular outcome in these conversations. I know by their nature that they're exploratory. So I suppose what he reflected back to me was that I seem to know an awful lot about this process, and I was presenting an awful lot of my previous discernments, my previous self-assessments, my previous reflections, my previous evaluations of situations and myself. And I was giving him a product of that. And after about, he mentioned that to me a couple of times, and I was like, I don't know how, like, what am I, to pretend that I haven't thought about this? Like, I didn't really know where to go with it.
What did it feel like in the moment when he suggested that to you?
Yeah, I kind of knew what he meant. And it felt like, I'll be honest with you, it felt like, geez, I'm not getting this right. Which again points a lot to where my kind of cognitive patterns were wanting to be right. We're wanting to, everything was pointing about wanting to be on it, wanting to be right. And I was very open about how I did feel. And I've kind of come full circle on this. It was highlighted to me again recently, and I think I'm always willing to be open and vulnerable when it's on my terms. But when someone else is probing or asking, I think I tend to revert back to, okay, I'll give an answer here. So yeah, it took me a while to just, like, eventually then about I think it was about the sixth session in, it was kind of mid-November. He asked me some questions, and I was kind of, Jesus, I don't know. I suppose he sensed a bit of resistance, and he kind of probed a bit more. And I was like, listen, I know I said I was coming in here with no expectations, but I'm kind of like, I'm feeling no different to when I first came in here. So maybe I've been kidding myself a bit, if I'm being honest. Like, this is, it's beginning to get a bit frustrating. I said, it's nothing personal. That's how I'm feeling. And he goes, right, tell me a bit more about that. And I said, well, I kind of like, I want to get moving. I kind of want to move through this. I want to learn more about what's holding me back. Like, are there some exercises you can give me? And he goes, well, and he'd explained this to me before. The nature of psychotherapy is talk therapy, and it's, there's some scripts and narratives running away there. We got to kind of talk our way through them. And he said, why don't you just give me the unfiltered you? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, tell me whatever is coming up across your mind, your thoughts, your feelings. And I said, Dungeons and Dragons. And then I immediately had to qualify it and go, I never played Dungeons and Dragons. I was never into comics. I wasn't much of a board game kid. I don't know where that came from. And he goes, great, give me another one. Arsenal. And I support Spurs. So like, I was qualifying everything. And he goes, just don't worry, just keep going. And I was going, red, complication. And I just started kind of like spitting stuff out. And then I just like, I feel shit. And he was like, wow, that's the first time you said that. And I was like, yeah. And what happened then, and this is going back to a really long answer to your first question, it was going back to what were the kind of the telling moments. I kind of felt so heavy it was a couch, actually. Nice cliche of a couch. I was on the couch and I just felt like, it was like my skeletal structure was made of lead. And I didn't have the strength and the muscles to lift it. It was kind of floppy, but without it being floppy, it was like, and I was kind of like that for a few minutes. I remember I had a cold and it blew my nose a couple of times. And he kept kind of asking me questions, but he let loads of silence hang. And then I'd say, I don't know how long later, maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, I kind of sat up a bit. And he said, it's a change in your kind of body positioning and physiology there. I was like, yeah, a bit of a change in everything. And he was there, what do you mean? And I said, I've never felt heavier than I did for the last few minutes. And as I was talking, it was like there was a cloud underneath me that was lifting me up, floating. It's the only way. I mean, hadn't happened before like this, so I don't know how else to describe it. And I was just like, oh, now I never felt lighter. So it was a really mad experience, to be honest with you. So I don't know. My explanation for what that was in relation to where the conversation started was some pattern was trapped. We know the body can keep the score, right? So I was trapping something. And whatever happened there and then, I reconciled it. It reconciled me, and it moved. I don't have any other explanation for it. Maybe some of your listeners might. They can offer them. I'm open to them. I don't know.
Just out of interest, and I don't want to hang too much on this, but what was it like walking out of the room that day?
Yeah, I mean, it was. Yeah, I just felt much lighter. I felt like I didn't feel like, fixed in the way that I had wanted to feel fixed, like that kind of subconscious expectation that it wasn't like I was woohoo sorted, let's go, but it was definitely, there was a deeper trust in myself, and like I'd always had a belief that I'd work my way through this, and like I said, it wasn't it wasn't a bout of clinical depression or anything. Like I was still enjoying life, but I just wasn't as purposeful or energized as I normally would be. I felt complicated in a way that I couldn't understand, I think is maybe a way to kind of put it. And yeah, I felt more trusting in the process and in myself leaving there.
You know, it's come up so many times in so many interviews, even the private ones I've done as well. Just the idea of our expectations of a feeling, even if it's a moment where we felt like either some degree of peace or acceptance with the moment, that it was somewhat different than maybe what we would have expected, or the external conditions could be almost like a bewildering experience that this feeling of peace is occurring in this moment. Just really intrigued, Jasper, to get a sense of your relationship with not knowing.
Mm. Something I'm very happy to address and explore when I'm the one who's curious. Something, something I'm not that willing to be probed on when someone else is highlighting that the lack of knowing might be at play, or questioning it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't know. There's something. It's so interesting though, even just about the process you mentioned there of so much optimization, or the control that can be part of that experience, and it resonates totally with me too. I think there's some point at which I probably thought that nothing would upset me. Like, like that could be a possibility, that I'd almost be like Teflon with the human experience itself. You know, when you mentioned just that retreat that you guys were on,
Mm.
and the idea then of to be in wonder of life
Mm.
emerged for you. What was? Can you give me a sense of how that specifically emerged?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the psychedelic experience that I'd had. I think it was probably 2 years prior to that. I did a macro dose of psilocybin with a guide. Kira was her name, also my wife's name. That kind of brought up a lot about acceptance for me and the futility of judgment. It acceptance of where we are, who we are, of the circumstances that unfold in front of us. So as I kind of built upon that insight over a year or two, I kind of went into Deerstone, and we started it off with a silent hike up into Glendalough. And myself and Paul, who was running it with me, Paul Gleason, who you know, we kind of like to use the outdoors to help us and the people with us to reconnect with themselves. So you kind of, we call it, he calls it back to source. And I love it. I think it's a great thing. So you can use the metaphor of nature, the metaphor of the terrain, the metaphor of the elements to bring you into some kind of, I suppose, where you're at, to connect, help you connect with where you're at. But you can also overdo that, and you can kind of you can invoke cynicism in people. If you're like, oh, the wind's blowing, okay, that means I'm facing resistance, and you kind of, it can go a bit too far. So we kind of we positioned it with everyone that, look, this is yours to embrace or resist in whatever way you want, but we're going to be open to it without kind of seeking it and searching for it and forcing it. And anyway, there was a few little bits and pieces. There was a deforestation and a replanting of native going on. There was a subsidence happened in a side of a hill where some trees kind of fell in. Different things like that just felt that even the deep rooted planted things kind of come unstuck. And we can plant things in the wrong places with the best of intentions, but find out later that kind of wasn't really the wisest choice. And that's kind of, I was just using all of this as and internalizing it. And then I was like, well, what kind of helps me navigate that truth? And it just kind of popped up. It was like, okay, acceptance. But I wanted it to be more than just acceptance. And it was like, well, if I'm accepting of something and curious about it, that's being in wonder of it. So it just kind of popped up and felt right. And I'm not big into wordsmithing. It's more about how I felt in relation to that question and that statement. Or what the way I kind of described, well, again, using Paul's terminology, it was like a principle. For me, that then became the principle for my year in 2025. And it's kind of evolved again over the past few weeks when I've been sitting with how last year went and looking at it from different angles and looking towards this year as well. And there's a kind of a statement that I've been playing with, which is part of Gay Hendricks' work in The Big Leap, which is I'm open to something, which is just I'm kind of in wonder of it, and then I commit to, which is what I'm going to do on the back of that wonder. And I definitely feel ready for the commitment side now, that Mark, than I did maybe last year. So yeah, to kind of very back to the start, is there one question? Not for me, not through life. Maybe I'll look back when I'm on the proverbial porch and rocking chair and go, there was one. But I don't have a sense of that now.
Yeah, I think though most people that I'm interviewing, just like you're alluding to, it's a different question at different times. And it's also, even what you alluded to there with the deeper roots becoming unstuck, recalibration is always a big part of this people's lives and people's processes. And even just as you're describing as well, like the shifts or shifting relationship with something that was either an identity, a way of life. Like, I think that's really fascinating what you were pointing to when you were saying that, like, we can run into difficulty sometimes when our identity and what we're doing is wrapped up in the same thing. And just intrigued for your experience with when you felt your identity was tied up in the same thing. Does that, because I think I get this too myself sometimes, and like you I am involved in something, there is a way of life, and then when I clearly don't do something that kind of aligns with what I'm either pointing to, saying, it can create there's almost like a little prison within it if we don't have what you're describing there around this curiosity and acceptance of whatever comes up that's kind of dissonant to that or a contradiction to it. Just from, given all that you've kind of shared there in terms of what's, some of the shifts that you've been experiencing, how would you describe that sense of like acceptance in your own life, in whatever way you want to take that?
Well, I kind of, over the years, I've done a lot of introspection. I've been coached a lot, and obviously, I take my coaching clients, both kind of, I work with some private clients who kind of fund their coaching through maybe the business they own or whatever the case is. And then I work with people in a corporate environment on a one-to-one basis, sometimes not that many. And then I do lots of group coaching and team coaching. But I do a kind of a values elicitation exercise with people in a one-to-one environment. And I went really deep on my own values elicitation. Do you know that I mentioned that the first conversation I had with a therapist, that I didn't really connect with. The one thing that I really connected with was when she said to me, we tend to get into the careers that we feel we need for ourselves. And I really needed, I got coached when I'm similar to you, right? Background in financial services, investment banking, private banking, wealth management. And I just wasn't fulfilled in it. And then my daughter was born, and I kind of had that moment of holding her and promising her that I'd help her be who she wanted to be and do what she wanted to do. And I just felt quite hypocritical that I wasn't doing it myself, and that she then became a kind of a real catalyst for me to go through the sticky patch of trying to figure that out. And I worked with a coach, and she helped me go through that by, and this is probably the first bit of dissonance, actually, I'm stumbling upon it. Unlock my handcuffs to a corporate way of thinking, where the security in the paycheck was there, and the IT help desk was there, and all of the things that I worried about. I knew where I had some innate strengths and some sense of purpose and service working with people. Always told I was a good listener, and always told I was good at helping people find their way rather than telling them and advising them. So, but like I didn't have a clue how to set up or run a business or operate anything. So Sharon kind of helped me through that by using a visualization exercise of kind of visualizing 5 years ahead, being true to who I felt I am and would become. And that vision was in 2013, looking forward to 2018. And at that stage, just it's interesting, I visualized that I would be living in Dublin near the coast with 2 children and a dog, and working self-employed but with a business partner, and pretty much, and loads of other kind of detail. Like, it was a detailed vision, like a kind of family Christmas involving kind of almost like an open mic, whether it was singing or a bit of fun, everyone kind of doing a party trick type thing, and being surrounded by that sense of fun and joviality, and having that connection back to family and meeting friends and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, the wheel of life, the exercise was kind of like, what's 9 out of 10 in 5 years' time? And that really just helped me. It was the first time that my belief system moved from I don't think I can into anything's possible. I felt totally liberated by it. And by the time 2018 came around, everything had been achieved, except I didn't have a dog at that point, and I had, the business was just me. I didn't have a co-founder or a business partner, but everything else was achieved. Yet when I got to 2018, there was a little bit of a sense of underwhelm, and I was curious about that. And what I realized was that I was thinking about what I wanted to do and what I wanted to have. I wasn't as clear on how I wanted to be. So it was all positively framed. It wasn't really addressing the tensions, the dissonance, the flaws. So at that point, I was very clear on what my values were. They were respect. Sorry, the first time I did my values, my number one value was authenticity, because I didn't feel like I'd been authentic to myself in my previous few years. I was kind of smashing it at the weekends, working in financial services, crawling into the week, fear on a Sunday night, crawling into the week, maybe coming up.
Days.
Yeah, maybe coming up for air and having some clarity of thought on a Tuesday afternoon, doing loads of work Wednesday, Thursday, probably out Thursday night for some sort of a networking or work related thing, and then Friday into the weekend. And getting by and doing well, but like really, what, 40% of my potential being tapped into, maybe even less. So I wanted to be authentic. That was my first value. But then I was kind of like quickly turned around after that and went, well, surely being true to my values leads to me being authentic. Authenticity for me isn't a value in its own right. So I kind of got, so anyway, came up with, I think it was at the time, respect, positivity, and camaraderie. And then in 2018, I realized myself and Kira gave up alcohol for 7 months between, we were totally cooked after Ireland won the Six Nations in Twickenham in March 2018. We were moving home in July 2018. And I was doing my first marathon in October 2018. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to go the whole way to the marathon. And Kira said she'd do it as well. So I realized in the build up to that commitment that respect was really important, because I was respecting others and others were respecting me. But the big dissonance, or the apathy that I felt then, that was similar enough to what I went through a couple of years ago, the bit that was missing for me was self-respect. So I was still prone to excess at a weekend, and wasn't really showing up with how I was planning at that stage. I used to always plan in quarters. I don't anymore. We can come back to that. But I was thinking in quarters, and my quarterly goals weren't being met, because this is back to the high performance kind of junkie, because I wasn't really performing too high myself at the beginning of the week. And also, like, you know, we had 2 kids, young kids, like, you know, there were other reasons other than just lifestyle. Like, there was lots of other reasons, but I just felt like I needed time and space to myself. And that was a big process shift, a big identity shift to go through then. It was great. It was tough, but it was great. Like, some of my mates, when I came home in 2018, July, were like, happy days, man. Great to see you. One lad said, give us a shout after the marathon. Like, see you then. Like, you boring bastards.
But it's
he meant it as a laugh, in fairness to him, but it was
but I don't know. It reminds me. I came back from Canada one year when I was living there, and I wasn't boozing. And a manager that I used to work with in corporate banking, I said, who we'd have great sessions with, I texted him to say, "Oh, I'm back for a week. Do you fancy meeting for a coffee?" He's like, "What do you mean a coffee?" And then I said, "Oh, well, I'm not drinking at the moment." And he said, "Oh, maybe next year get in touch with me again."
It is gas, and I think it shifted quite a bit over the last few years. The introduction of 0.0 drinks, people seem a lot more comfortable with it. More and more people, you know, I was a big consumer of what I've since found out is called Quit Lit, which is quitting alcohol literature. There's some great books out there, some great podcasts on it too. 1 beer, no year, or 1 year, no beer, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a bit more commonplace now. But I didn't really know anyone else apart from people who would have deemed it necessary from an abuse of the substance to stop drinking. And that's the big question that kept on coming back to me. So, why, do you have a drink problem? I was like, no, I've got a problem with my drinking, I think, rather than a drink problem. But I don't care how I frame it. I just don't want to drink for a number of months. So that and actually, I felt really quite at sea when I came home in July. First of all, a friend of mine passed away at the time, and that was difficult. And then even going to her funeral and meeting all of my old friends from that time, kind of university time friends, went in J1s and J2s with all these people. And they're all reminiscing, having a few drinks. And I just felt a bit removed, is how I would describe it. But I also felt I felt quite vacant and absent even in myself. I felt removed from myself after I left that environment of the wake and the funeral. So I was also quite curious about that at the time. I lost another friend in the end of 2020, and when she passed away, I grieved very heavily. It was a very different grief. There was a wave of real an outburst of emotion that came with that one. So yeah, that dissonance and that activity or behavior kind of decoupling from identity, it's kind of happened in a few different ways and phases for me over the years. But the self-respect one was a big one for me. So now if I'm looking at my values and I'm thinking about how they show up, I might have different terminology for them now, but it's all to do with my sense of who I am and how I feel I'm showing up for myself and in this world, both for me and for others, in a way that is genuine, you know.
And for you, Jasper, what does that? I know you're talking there about even just not plying yourself with booze at the weekends and things like this. But what else comes under that umbrella of self-respect for you?
Doing the work, I think. So, like asking the tough questions, being kind of joyful. Not in a forced positivity way, but in quite a natural way. So like the first bit of coaching that I would have been involved in years ago, I really felt a deep connection to my mum as I was kind of reflecting on how I'd gotten into this like financial services world, because I was basically trying to conform, going right back to when I left school. And then I developed a real fixed mindset. Like if I saw the people succeeding, I was kind of like, didn't want to be near them because wouldn't hold myself in the best light, or I'd begrudge them if I saw someone doing really well, and I'd be kind of wanting to take them down a peg or two in my mind, not verbally. So yeah, I felt like when I went through that first bit of coaching, I was a lot more open and curious and kind of almost celebrating others' success and looking to learn from it. To me, that's self-respect as well. And then, look, understanding that, you know, we're all human and we get things really wrong. So, you know, self-respect is kind of going, right, well, how might I handle that a little bit differently next time? That Maya Angelou quote always sits with me. You know, people won't remember what you said or what you did. They'll remember how you made them feel, or something to that effect. And self-respect for me is important in that too. How am I leaving myself feeling? Not just what am I saying to myself, or what am I thinking? I think that's a really important thing for me. So that the self-respect really folds into knowing myself better and better as life goes on.
Is there any moment that comes to mind where you really felt that shift in terms of self-respect for yourself?
There's probably a few. Definitely over the last couple of years, it feels like at a much deeper level. And I kind of interwoven with self-respect and self-trust. Ian Kingston said to me once on a call as I was wrapping up to go prepare for a leadership coaching program that I was delivering the following day. I said, I gotta go get ready. And he was kind of like, well, okay, yeah, no worries. And he goes, is it new material? Is it? I said, no. New client? No. And he goes, so what do you have to go prepare? I'm confused. I said, I want to look at the slides. I want to make sure they're all right. And he goes, do you not know the content? Do you need the slides? And I know they need a visual. All right, they need the visual. Okay, yeah. And then he just said, when are you going to start trusting yourself a bit more? And I was like, Jesus, yeah, spot on. Not trusting myself here. I was actually creating interference. So I love the Timothy Galway formula: performance equals potential minus interference. I was generating interference. I wasn't just mitigating against it. I was actually building interference, creating it to take away from my performance. So I'd be going into programs like that feeling like I had to get certain points across, come across like I felt and sounded well informed and knowledgeable on the subject. That I'd be far more open now to just kind of having a conversation like the way you would, go, so yeah, how are you feeling? What's going on? Where would you like this to go? And the stuff is all there, the information, the knowledge is all there, and you can play it like a card in a game of cards when it's relevant, rather than being the peacock displaying all the feathers at the beginning, you know.
Just out of interest for you, like given all the, you know, and I you know, there's some similarities for sure, just in terms of even the different modalities that we both explored or experienced. I love the idea as well of you being at the Chinese medicine practitioner and just going, I'd just like to, I'd just like to play around with this as well. And just from when you're thinking about this self-respect thing, because I think the connection with self-trust, I think it's a really beautifully human thing that we evolve and move with. From your perspective, like, are there things in particular that helped? Because I sense this is, you know, I put out a podcast today where the question that the person was sitting with, like, was around, am I enough? So just from your perspective, was there anything particular that you felt was helpful in this?
I think it's just an accumulation. Like I'm in a kind of a coaching. I facilitate and run a coaching community, which is people subscribing into it like you do a gym membership, and we have group calls and we have a cadence to the week. But I'm also a member in another one, and I have been for years. And before that, I was involved in a mastermind group in the UK. And before that, I was involved in a coaching kind of community as well. So I've always been in these, surrounded myself where these kind of questions are maybe explored by others, if not posed to me. And there was one bit that stood out. I was going for a run in London, and it was around the time I was going towards Battersea Park, and it was around the time the Nine Elms development was all being built. The US Embassy in Ballymore were building all the different apartment blocks. So it was just the main road going from Vauxhall down to Battersea Park was like a building site, the road itself. And I had this weird like daydream maybe or something, that Kira and the kids were coming in the car to meet me in Battersea Park, and Kira was taking a change of clothes, and we were going to spend a few hours in the park. And a big articulated cement mixer was reversing out of a building site, and I kind of had to stop. And as I was stopping, I was like, "Oh God, that could have, you know, if I wasn't paying attention, headphones in, like, I don't know if that fella would have seen me." And then I was like, geez, imagine that happened with Kira and the kids. And then I started running on, and I had this really vivid image of it happening. And then the weirdest thing happened, where a kind of a tear rolled down my cheek. And then I felt this big rush up the back of my neck, and I was kind of lifted forward like that. And what was happening in my mind or my thoughts around the time of that rush was like total devastation, but also I'd still be alive. I'd carry on. And that was a kind of a fundamental question in the values elicitation. It's like, forget about families outside of you. What is it that's so inherently valuable and important to you that you love your family so much that you're going to put them number one? And the question that I'd often ask is, if there was no family, what would remain important to you? Like, horrific scenes to imagine, but I suppose in that moment, Mark, again, I don't know. It's like the story on the couch with the therapist. I don't know what it was or what induced it. I had one more since, but in that moment, it felt like I genuinely believed in myself, and my self-respect kicked on to another level. That I had a moment of the worst possible thing that I could imagine, that I realized I'd have to live on, and it would be my choice, following a period of immense grief, of course, how
Yeah, of
to
course.
show up in that life.
Yeah.
That I'd still, like Viktor Frankl, choose your response. So yeah, I don't know. I think that was a pivotal moment. I also did a Michael Singer course during COVID. He wrote The Untethered Soul, and the course was amazing. It was like an 8-module self-directed online learning, and I can't remember what the name of it was, but I was running again. I was out running, and I was running in towards town for some work when, like, COVID was still, there was still a bit of a lockdown going on, and I had a similar rush up the spine, and yeah. People are going to think I'm batshit crazy, but anyway, like
Not at all.
these are just the moments that happened. I'm fairly mundane, and apart from these spikes, but yeah, I was running along, and I just felt like, all I could see was the trees, and all I could hear was the birds, and the cars on the road just weren't there anymore, and I felt this kind of great unity or something. I can't really describe it, but again, there were tears on my face that day as well. So yeah, there's been one or two really kind of moments like that. I think that one running in towards town that I just described, that followed a period of really quite intense and enjoyable self-reflection and introspection, where I felt my understanding of myself went to a whole other level. In fact, my understanding of the mind and of our being, not just mine, went to a whole other level. I've often wanted to go back to that course, but I still haven't. I've opened it once or twice, but I haven't gone through the whole thing again.
But I don't know, just when you mentioned your question that you're even exploring the last little while, to be kind of in the wonder of this life, essentially. I think those moments just out on a run where there's not an expectation that something like this will occur, I think they're just remarkably life affirming experiences. And throughout the course of this conversation, Jasper, I love the focus on what this would have been in 2013, and it would have been around optimization. Then the other wrinkles that are coming in at different moments where life shifts or something occurs where it requires you to reflect again. The wrinkles or the movements that are occurring between this idea of even acceptance and curiosity, ideas around attachment to identity and an openness, but also what's very clear in your path as well, a commitment to, on the back of whatever curiosities you may be experiencing as well. And I must say, I always find it very, I don't know, it warms my heart. Just a few times you've mentioned Kira, I just really like the sound of what seems like a really, just a fundamental partnership or something like this. Really curious to ask you, Jasper, the question of what is a good life for you?
I like to have a lot of fun, Mark. I really enjoy my family of 4 here and the laughs we have. I really enjoy the laughs with my mates. I really do. My family, the Walsh family, just had a couple of days together. I've 2 older siblings, and they're married, one in Germany and one in Australia. Their kids are 19 up to kind of 26, I think, 25, 26. So they're a bit older. My brother and sister are both older than me as well. I'm the mistake, but my mother calls me the bonus because that's what Irish mums do. And yeah, like that was great. We had lots of fun on that too. Like I like to have fun. Now there are times when life isn't fun, and I like to think that a good life in response to that is accepting what's happening and handling it in whatever way you feel equipped to handle it at that moment in time. I feel like where we all, like, I feel like what I do well for others is I help them simplify what seems complex to them. And the people that I engage with in a professional environment or a personal context who I value their input, service, friendship the most, or they help me simplify what I feel is complex. So sometimes it's just companionship and a sense of kind of belonging or being in it together. And then other times it's kind of like, okay, now I understand it better. So maybe that answers it in a roundabout way.
Jasper, that answered it absolutely beautifully. To be honest, I love even the idea of accepting of the laughs and accepting of the tears, the human connection, and I get a huge kick out of as well, just that simplification of something, or when something dissolves or resolves itself, and however often it's usually other people in my life that help me do that as well. Jasper, look, I've enjoyed this conversation immensely, man. So thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Thanks a million, Mark.